Hello, welcome to Salisbury Cathedral's daily reflection for Tuesday the 11th of May. I'm Edward Probert. There are two spurs to what I want to say today. The first is an obituary I read last week, and the other is a remark made during last week by it was on the discussion following our midday Zoom prayers for members of the congregation, and where the Reverend Simon Wilkinson remarked that he never knew what obscure book I was going to quote next. Well, Simon, I aim to please, so I'll see what I can do. But first, to that first obscure book. This is from the shelf over here, actually. I happened upon it the other day. It's a book I bought when I was at university, and it's a journal of John Hanning Speke's explorations of Central Africa in the 1850s. One of the great explorers in the interior of Africa, along with Livingstone and Stanley, one of these great heroic figures of Victorian Great Britain. All three of these men, very much lauded and their virtues extolled for generations after their lives. All of them motivated in their explorations in Africa by curious mixtures, really, of some kind of version of the blend of evangelical missionary enthusiasm, especially so in the case of Livingstone, of course, of a passion to suppress the slave trade, which was still plied, especially along the coast of East Africa. A great personal bravery, it must be said. Also a great commercial opportunism, and a sense of the superiority of the civilization from which they came over the ones which they encountered as they went. These people all were from subtly different backgrounds, actually. Livingstone and Stanley both came from very poor backgrounds, and above all, Stanley did. He was abandoned as a baby by as an illegitimate baby. He was brought up in a workhouse. At the age of 18, he escaped and ran away, in effect, to the United States, where he subsequently fought on both sides of their civil war. And he then returned to Britain, pursued a career in journalism on both sides of the Atlantic, and ended up here as a knight of the realm. Livingstone was very much the most earnest about his faith, and Speke is probably the odd one out. The other two their name lives together, but Speke is probably pretty obscure to most people, and in most respects, to be honest, rightly so. It's interesting looking at this now. When I was focusing on the history of part of what is now Uganda, the kingdom of Buganda, in the late 19th century, when I was at university, this was just one of the sources I needed to read. Parts of, I didn't bother reading the whole book, so it's interesting just to glance through the rest of that book now after all these years. Speke, this man, was an officer, captain in the British Indian Army, um, and sort of what you might call a natural product of British imperialism. He seems to have had the good fortune to miss what we call the Indian Mutiny in 1857 because he was off in Africa exploring. He went all over places that people had never been before who were white. And because he was the first to do that and the first to write about these places, he gained a certain fame. And he was undoubtedly a considerable explorer of the interior of Africa and revealed whole new geographical features and truths about the place, that vast continent. And he was obviously a really very remarkable linguist. So I don't wish to decry the man, but he was also in many ways not a particularly exemplary hero. And his end was a rather pathetic one. In his middle age, he managed to kill himself accidentally with his own gun. Well, all these guys made a lot of assumptions about the places to which they came and the people they encountered. But what, reading this now 40 years after I last looked at it, what really strikes me and frankly shocks me about it is the enthusiastic slaughter that Speke engages in with more or less any living animal. And of course, the bigger the animal, the better. Any opportunity, he's out there with his gun and banging away at whatever he sees. Elephants, rhinos, lions, giraffes, buffaloes, and much, much more, guinea fowl, pretty much whatever there is alive, it's dead if he gets an opportunity. Well, one of the things we need to acknowledge about our cultural inheritance in this country is the legacy we have left in other places. And guns and the effects of those guns are a considerable part of that. These things were unknown in Central Africa until Speke and his like got there. Well, the other thing I want to remark upon is the obituary of the astronaut Michael Collins, who died last week in age 90. In 1969, he was, of course, the man who was still on the spacecraft as it orbited the moon, while the other two, his companions, were on the moon and therefore became far more well known. On his own circling the moon, he went into complete isolation every time he went round the other side of the moon, and he wrote this subsequently: "I'm alone now, truly alone and absolutely isolated from any known life. I am it. If account were taken, the score would be 3 billion plus 2 over on the other side of the moon, and 1 plus God knows what on this side." Well, that's a sobering reflection, but it's also sobering to me because of the number he quotes there, 3 billion. That's 50 years ago, when I was 11, when Livingstone and Stanley and Speke were in Central Africa. The world's population was just over 1 billion. Now, apparently, I'm in my 60s, it's 7.8 billion. And conceivably it will double again by the end of this century. Well, I trust you have come across the endeavour being spearheaded by my colleague Robert Titley, the Treasurer, to get this cathedral to gold eco church standard, gold standard for our green efforts. It's worth noticing these things can catch us almost any time. The colossal effects which we humans can have on the world around us, and the speed with which those things can take effect. We need to notice these things and respond to them in our own lives and collectively in the life of the church and in our own homes before we continue that casual slaughter of the world we've inherited. We do indeed need to turn it around, which has the same meaning linguistically as to repent. Well, I did say I needed to keep up my pattern of quoting obscure literary discoveries to Simon, and here's one last one. It's in Richard Brinsley Sheridan's The School for Scandal. In Act 5, Scene 3, one of the characters says, and this stood out on the page for me because it's at the very top, just over the turn. Enter Joseph Surface. Joseph Surface says, "Sir, I beg you 10,000 pardons for keeping you a moment waiting. Mr. Stanley, I presume." Oliver Surface, "At your service." Well, Mr. Stanley, I presume. Interesting remark. I leave you with a question. When he wrote up his account famously of his discovery of Dr. Livingstone in Africa, did John Rowlands, aka Henry Stanley, make a playful allusion there to a comic play which was written about 100 years earlier, when he asserts that the words with which he greeted him were Dr. Livingstone, I presume. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.